I was struggling. I was in a really bad place.
I found out that I wasn't legally married.
My feelings had died out and I was just suffering in that relationship.
Islamically, he already gave me the 3 talaqs.
I was desperate to get divorced, so Jav's helped us out a lot.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Marriage Matters here on British Muslim TV with myself, your host, Javaid Iqbal. Last week we discussed is divorce a dirty word. This week we're going to be discussing about emotional abuse. Now I've got to warn you now, we will be discussing matters that may trigger some people who have obviously been affected by these topics. They may have been through it, they may be in a recovery stage. So we have to obviously advise viewer discretion that we will be discussing things about emotional abuse, the effects of it, the nature of it, what happens, how to get out of it, and what happens once you're out of it and how to stay out of it. So joining us tonight will be Warisa Hussain, who I believe is an NLP practitioner, Islamic Studies graduate, MSc in Child, Adolescent and Family Mental Health. She has over 10 years of experience supporting victims of DV and also survivors of DV, which is more important. So we're joined live. Warisa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you doing this evening?
Alhamdulillah, so far so good.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for taking time out and joining us on this very pertinent topic that we need to discuss, which is obviously emotional abuse. I deal with this on almost a regular daily basis in my job, so to speak. But for the viewers out there who obviously don't know, sometimes abuse can just be clarified as physical abuse. I mean, that's the most sort of common one that the people know about is physical abuse. But just describe briefly what is emotional abuse.
So emotional abuse, which is also known as psychological abuse, comes in many shapes and form. And one thing often leads to another in a relationship, and it often happens in intimate partner relationships, where one partner may be manipulating the other or showing extreme possessiveness, coercive control, gaslighting, where your feelings are not validated, constantly being critical, hypercritical of you, name calling, not respecting your boundaries, invading your privacy, putting lots of restrictions which are completely unbearable, and having unrealistic expectations from you, banning you from meeting your loved ones, family and friends, preventing you from work. So there are lots of things that can come into the category of emotional abuse or psychological manipulation. And it starts through various things such as projection, where one partner may himself or herself may be doing something, but they will blame it on the other. Where there is denial that, for example, I'm not the one who did it, you did. Or if somebody's trying to have a conversation with them and trying to highlight the issues within a relationship, they'll simply avoid any conversation, and they kind of become like a wall where you can't really reason with them. So there are many things that come into this, but the key thing to look out for is coercive control.
Is what, sorry?
Coercive control.
Coercive and controlling behavior. Now,
because abuse is all about imbalance of power.
Absolutely.
Spouses,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
When one is trying to be the superior one, like I'm the king of the castle, do as you're told.
Exactly.
That's not how marital relationships work. But
let's just going backwards a little bit with obviously you've obviously said a lot, given quite a sort of lengthy and well thought out definition of emotional abuse. But some of the viewers out there will be watching, they may not understand some of the definitions that you've used. So for example, when you said gaslighting, what is defined as gaslighting, and if you can give us like a real life working example of what that would be?
For example, if I say to you that whatever you're telling me, you're just making it up, or I invalidate everything that you tell me in terms of your experiences or issues that you're going through, instead of providing like a listening ear or trying to understand what the real problem is, just kind of invalidating everything that you're saying. So, for example, if you say to me that I'm not giving enough time, right? And you say, you're just making it up. So it's basically denying everything that's happening.
It's almost being dismissive of the other person's issues or problems or whatever they're trying to raise. Now, let me ask you something here, because we get a lot of people coming through our doors, the offices, and a lot of the time what happens is they don't actually know that they're going through it. So, for example, we'll have somebody come in and they'll say, well, I don't have a problem, but my sister or my brother's brought me in. And the brother or sister will turn around and say, oh my God, he or she was so different 5 years ago. And now he or she's been married for 5 years and they don't speak to the family and they don't come to see mum and they don't do this and they don't do that. And they're always sort of, whatever the husband says, they'll do. So, but the person who's going through it, the actual victim, so to speak, they sometimes don't even know that they're going through it. Now, does that make it difficult for them to, like, from an outsider's perspective, I may look at something and go, okay, that's an emotionally abusive relationship. But the victim, the husband or the wife, and remember, this is not gender-based, this is abuse full stop, in every way, shape or form, whether it's man, woman, husband, wife, civil partnership, whatever it is. It's not obviously specific to any gender, race, class or culture. But the person who's going through it, they don't know themselves that they're going through it. So how would they become self-aware, or what would it be that they need to look out for? So I suppose what I'm asking is, what is the characteristic displays of somebody who is emotionally abusive?
For someone who's watching this person, the victim, from the outside, what they will notice or observe is change in behavior. For example,
In the victim?
This is for people who are observing from the outside.
Yeah.
So for them, it will be like suddenly this person who used to be very sociable and used to go outside or was passionate about their work, now suddenly they're not meeting anyone. They're not coming out of the house. They're canceling all the invitations. They're not coming outside to meet their friends or family. And even when they do go outside, someone is always there with them, like the partner is there, or they're being chaperoned. Calling them over the phone, something as simple as that. They cannot answer those calls unless and until they have to put that call on speaker so that their spouse
we've
can
seen
answer
that.
the conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
So there's some patterns and behaviors to look out for. And for the victim herself or himself, like you said, abuse is not a gendered crime. And both the genders are kind of on the receiving
Absolutely.
end.
But I'm saying if the victim doesn't know, so what we get is, a lot of the time, I'll get a client come in, they'll explain everything to me, and I'll say, that sounds like classic emotional abuse. It is controlling, coercive behavior, as per the legal definition of abuse, which includes that now. And they say, no. Well, my husband suggested something, and I thought about it, and I said yes, and then they went, first I said no, then they said yes, and they convinced me. But they don't actually think it's abuse, because maybe they don't actually know that so I guess what I'm saying is there a subtle art form of getting the victim stage by stage in increments to where you want to get them without even the victim knowing that they're being abused, that this is emotional abuse. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, something big and something like, oh no, you are going to do this, otherwise X, Y, Z is going to happen. It can be very almost seditious or very subtle, that they get inside their head and they're in there then.
So like I mentioned earlier, you have to look out for a specific pattern of behavior shown by the perpetrator. So often victims, when they're in a relationship, they are unable to distinguish between love, and there is another term I'm going to use, trauma bonding, where the victim gets emotionally attached to the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And the reason they are in denial is because it's very difficult for someone who's being controlled to identify that they are being controlled. They often perceive it as, oh, this person is only worried about me or concerned about me.
It's love.
They are made to believe like that. They are made to think like that. This is why you see that in amongst victims, they have low self-esteem, they lack confidence, because they're constantly being told that you're not good enough, you can't do anything right, and you provoke me to get angry. You're the reason I get upset. You're the reason I come home late. So everything is projected onto the victim.
Yeah.
So when you're living with someone like this for so many years, it's quite natural for the victims to start thinking differently. And it's only when you see visible scars or wounds, when things go from bad to worse, then they realize this is abuse. Otherwise, unfortunately, we have this stigma or stereotype in our community, in our society,
100%.
that abuse only means when someone has beaten you black and blue.
Yeah.
Although there are so many forms of abuse, and psychological abuse or psychological emotional manipulation is known as the worst form.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because it doesn't have scars. It doesn't have scars, but it has mental scars. Now, I suppose my question was, is the victim, because they don't know any better, how do they recognize that this is abuse? Like, from an outside perspective, I understand. Like, I would look at something and go, right, that's abuse. But the person inside, him or her, they don't know it's abuse. Like you said, they don't know any better. How do they eventually, or what does it take for somebody to convince them that they're being abused? Because like you said, because you've got that trauma bonding, which, as you've described it, I've associated it a lot with Stockholm Syndrome as well, which was quite, obviously, you'll know about Stockholm Syndrome. So how do you make the victim agree or get to that point where they think, okay, this is actually abuse now, rather than this is the way it is?
So in a normal, healthy relationship where people are satisfied and happy and feel content, and most importantly, safe. Unlike a happy relationship, in an abusive relationship, first of all, you don't feel safe. You are constantly walking over eggshells. You are constantly feeling unsafe and threatened, because that's how a person who is receiving emotional abuse feels like. So their confidence level is going to get affected. Their self-esteem is going to become low. Things that they used to enjoy prior to this relationship, they don't enjoy that anymore. Their mental and physical health will be impacted. So, for example, they will get migraines, headaches, nausea. Sometimes they also end up with moderate forms of depression, anxiety. They will stop showing up at work, and maybe because they're not allowed to work. And then there's so many other aspects that impact their personality. So there is a change in the way they behave, which is noticeable.
So these are the physical symptoms of physical symptoms of emotional abuse. So it might not necessarily be the physical scars, but like I said, there's sort of change in personality, which they themselves may not know, but other people will notice. And obviously, if somebody can get through to them and sort of say, this is what you're going through isn't normal. It isn't normal. It isn't par for the course, as they say. So you need to get help. We will resume with Warisa after the break. Stay tuned and we'll carry on talking about this topic. See you after the break.
Do you need help with your marriage? Do you suspect infidelity in your marriage? Are you struggling to gain the truth over a matter of concern? Whatever the concern, we're here to try and help. Email us for free support today at marriagematters@britishmuslim.tv.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Marriage Matters with me, Javaid Iqbal. I've been speaking to Warisa, who's an NLP practitioner. Better get that right. We've been discussing emotional abuse, how to spot it, the red flags, and obviously the characteristic changes that appear in both the victim and the characteristic things you need to sort of look out for in the perpetrator of this. So recently we were talking about emotional abuse and the effects. Now, one thing I do want to discuss with you, and one thing I want to sort of bring out there, from personal experience in the sort of, in the job that I do and the sort of people that I meet and the cases that we've handled, is a lot of the victims, men and women, majority I have to admit is women in this particular sort of scenario, is the community around them. The community around them, the family around them, some of the people that they know, they tend to normalize these things. So what they'll say, for example, they'll say, husbands shout, husbands get angry. You have to listen to your husband. Don't get him angry. He's going to say these things. If he wants to take your daughter to Pakistan to get married to the first cousin who's got the big tash and he rides a big buffalo, let him. What do you care, right? So she'll go, oh, but my mate's done it and my uncle's done it, and my auntie's done it, and everybody's done it. So why am I different? So I guess the question I'm asking is, when everybody around you in your family circle, community circle, friendship circle, when they normalize that behavior, how are you going to then escape? Number one, how are you going to recognize that it's an emotional abuse when everybody's normalizing it? And number two, how are you going to escape that, given that you may well be institutionalized, having been married for 20 years, for 25 years, and not know any different whatsoever?
So you've asked 3 questions.
I've asked you 3 questions, and I'm asking for 3 replies. You don't have to worry about the bridegroom on the buffalo riding with a big tash. We can leave him alone.
And the second thing you asked is, after identification, how can you break the stigma or the stereotype that exists in the society, community,
within the
Within your own
community.
family system. So in regards to breaking the stigma, there are many things that we can do as a nation, as a society, because for one person to stand against everyone is going to be difficult, especially if there is financial dependence and many other elements involved, for example, children. So when you leave an abusive relationship, first of all, you don't leave an abusive relationship, you escape it, because
Absolutely.
you have to have a safety plan. Being in an emotionally abusive relationship doesn't mean that you're safe just because you're not being hit, because often one thing leads to another. And just shouting at someone, screaming at someone, name calling, accusations, blaming, projection, all of this creates a very toxic family environment, which is not only bad for the spouses, it's also unhealthy for children who are involved and are witnessing it, because they are going to learn these behaviors and they will normalize this. And then this will be passed from one generation to another. This is why it's extremely important to break this cycle, the cycle of abuse.
Absolutely.
And the first step is to recognize it. And then, like I already said, that you have to look out for controlling behavior and pattern. Sometimes you make a suggestion to your partner, like you wear blue color because it suits you. That's one thing. But then there is, if you don't dress up the way I want you to, then you'll suffer the consequences. When there are threats involved, when you feel unsafe, insecure, when you feel you're walking on eggshells, when you start having trust issues because you can't trust your partner, you're always intimidated by them, you're scared, you're fearful of them. These are all signs of unhealthy, toxic relationships. And in regards to family or community at large, there is the stereotype that it's okay for a man or a woman even to act in a certain way. And women are expected to be submissive, although Islamically speaking, the obedience to husband is only applicable when the husband is asking for something which is permissible and not forbidden. For example, if the husband says, I will not allow you to wear the hijab, so the woman is under no obligation to obey her husband in those regards. Or if the husband tells her not to go and meet her blood relatives, her family, her siblings, you don't have to obey her, because breaking ties with your loved ones, with your blood relatives,
with your
is
kins.
haram. It's not permissible. So you need to set boundaries. That's the first thing you need to do when you're in an abusive relationship.
But this is what I was going to come to next. What my second part of the question is, unfortunately, the community, our culture, the Southeast Asian culture, that will always take precedent. When I say always, within the confines of this conversation, it will take precedent over Islam. Because when you start listening to Islam, or when you start following Islam, your power, that control you have over your victim is going to go. Because obviously, like you said, if you follow Islam in the truest sense of the word, then you don't have that power over that person, over the victim. Now, my next question is, and I see this a lot again in my daily life, in my daily job, is emotional abuse or emotional control by proxy. Now, when I say by proxy, I get a lot of men and women coming to me and say, well, my partner has said, if you don't allow this, I'm not going to let this happen. So there's almost like an intervening element in the middle. So if you don't allow me to go to Pakistan and do what I need to do, maybe even get married again, or, marry one of the children off, I won't allow you to go to your brother's wedding. I won't allow you to go visit your parents. If your daughter doesn't listen to me, if the daughter doesn't listen to me, or the son doesn't listen to me, then I'm going to blame you. I'll get a lot of wives, unfortunately. Like I said, it's not gender-based. We get a lot of wives who say, well, anything that children do, the husband throws on me. If our daughter is going out or whatever, she's studying, or son's studying, and he doesn't want to marry his cousin Shagufta in Pakistan, the husband will say, oh, it's because of you. It's your fault. Now, is that also a form of abuse when it's done by proxy, using a third person as a conduit in between?
Of course. When it comes to manipulation, there are numerous methods to manipulate someone. Putting conditions that I'll do this only if you do this, or you'll get this if you listen to me or do as you're told. In a healthy relationship, you don't put conditions. When you give love, it's unconditional. Similarly with neglect, neglect is also a form of abuse. When your emotional needs are not being met, this is another thing. Women often in our society are told, it's so what if he doesn't spend enough quality time with you or your kids? At least he's providing you with a roof on your head. At least you've got clothes on your back. At least you've got food on the table. But
That's
we forget that even when you keep a pet, you provide them with a roof, we give them food and water, but this is a relationship with a human being. They have their needs that have to be met. Again, Islamically, it's obligatory. And often people in our community or culture, they kind of expect the women to suffer in silence and not say anything about it, not to speak about it, and they call it sabr. So I want to clarify that patience or sabr does not mean suffering in silence. We belong to a religion, we belong to a faith where we have rights, we've been given rights and responsibilities. Our neighbors have so many rights over us. So how is it possible that we can get away with mistreating our spouses and think that our prayers will be accepted, for example? So often victims of abuse, any form of abuse, they stay in toxic relationships because of fear of what the community is going to say, or sometimes their family are not supportive, and they fear that if they leave or escape the abuser, then who is going to provide for them?
Absolutely.
Who is going to look after their children? Safety is the most important one, because we know statistics show that every week 2 women are killed by their partners, and this often happens when they're leaving or escaping an abusive relationship.
I mean, no perpetrator wants the victim to leave. They want that power and control. The other thing I want to touch on briefly before we conclude is what you said about obviously our parents or our community, etc. There is a generational shift and there is a generational gap between obviously our elders or the first wave, second wave of immigrants that came into this country and obviously the generation that's growing up now. Whereas let's say, I know a lot of women in their 60s, 70s who would put up with a lot of the stuff that you've said because they had economic, they had financial, they had social, they had communal reasons to do that. But now obviously there's avenues to move away. There is ways of getting out of them relationships. And I think it's very, very important that we don't normalize this behavior. And I think it was maybe one of the generations above us, or certainly one generation above me, I'm quite old, right? They will normalize it. But I don't think it needs to be normalized now. What help can women get who are in this situation, if you want to briefly touch upon that?
So any forms of abuse, whether it's emotional or physical or spiritual or financial, this has to end. And the victim needs to tell himself or herself that this is not normal and this is not acceptable. And they have to set boundaries. This is extremely important for anyone who's watching this right now and maybe in an abusive relationship. You have to draw a line because it surely has to end. So while you're planning on confronting your emotional abuser, you must play it safe. You have to subtly draw a line and know when and where they have to stop their abuse. Do not negotiate with them. And once you have successfully drawn the line, you'll see the change. Because often they take advantage of the fact, thinking that this person doesn't have any boundaries. This person
open doors.
Will never say no to me and I'll get whatever I want. So you have to tell yourself that it's never your fault while you're coping with emotional abuse. And there are some things that are beyond your control, and you cannot change someone unless and until they want to change themselves. Because often abusers or perpetrators are in denial. They never acknowledge that they are at fault or they have done something to hurt someone or they're mistreating. So I would advise to seek marital counseling, go to a therapist if it's affecting your physical and mental health.
Right. One last question.
Physical health of your child.
One last question, Warisa, is what about and I get this a lot as well, what about the women and the men, the victims who say, well, better the devil you know than the devil you don't? If you can really quickly answer that.
It's just the fear of the unknown. Sometimes people stay in comfort zones, knowing that what they are going to be subjected with, rather than to expose themselves to something they have no idea or clue about. And often women who are financially dependent on the abuser or the perpetrator, they find it extremely difficult to leave. If they don't have a good support system, they know their family is not going to support them. They need to surround themselves with positive people, supportive people, build their network so that they don't have to fear that if I leave or if I have to make certain changes in my life, I will be subjected to isolation.
I think a lot of the time it is fear that obviously stops a lot of the victims from sort of escaping these relationships. Warisa, thank you very, very much for joining us. this evening. Inshallah, we'll have you on again. You take care of yourself, and thank you very, very much again. Most grateful. If you've been affected by any of the issues that we've spoken about today, there is help that you can receive. They're all online on our website. Take care of yourself, and inshallah, we'll see you again next week on another episode of Marriage Matters. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Do you need help with your marriage? Do you suspect infidelity in your marriage? Are you struggling to gain the truth over a matter of concern? Whatever the concern, we're here to try and help. Email us for free support today at marriagematters@britishmuslim.tv.